All right. That's Hashem. It should. I hope Air Canada starts flying there again soon. All right. Let's get started. We were learning yesterday about Onoas Isha, and the question that was being asked is, I know that it's important to be sensitive to your wife, but what about sensitive to other women? Do all women need that kind of sensitive talk? And specifically, the person was saying, do I have to be sensitive to my secretary and be careful about what I say to her, or am I allowed to chew her out and be very frank and blunt? So we saw yesterday in the footnote really a very important idea, and that is that when you cause a person to feel pain through something that you say, um, this may have a very negative reaction on the speaker, even if it's not in the best interests of the person that I've insulted. So, like we were talking about yesterday, that story from the Gemara, that this rabbi, and it wasn't just through his speech, it was through the fact that he didn't show up when he was supposed to on Erev Yom Kippur, that Hashem caused him to die because his wife just shed one single tear that he wasn't showing up for on Erev Yom Kippur when she realized that he wasn't coming. And so Hashem took his life, not because it was in the best interests of his wife, but rather because this kindles the wrath of Hashem that you've behaved that way. So the next thing is Od Kasuv B'Gemara Sham. The Gemara says further, Abba Rabbi El Azar. Sorry, Miyom she'necharav beis hamikdash ninalu shari tefillah. That from the day that the temple was destroyed, the gates of prayer have been locked. Shenemar gam ki ezak v'ashaveya sasam tefilasi. As that it says in Eicha, which describes the Churban, that even when I cry out to Hashem, my prayer has been sealed. Kolomar shemiyom churban beis hamikdash hakadosh baruch hu na'al shari shamayim shelo yikansu atfilos. What that means is, in a sense, that from the day that the temple was destroyed, God locked the gates of heaven so that prayer would not be able to penetrate. V'hosif Rabbi Elazar she'afal pi sheshari tefillah ninalu, shari d'ma'os lo ninalu. And Rabbi Elazar adds that even though the gates of prayer have been locked, the gates of tears were never locked. In other words, when a person cries, that has the ability to penetrate the inner sanctum of heaven. Shenamar, Shim'a tefilasi Hashem v'shavasi ha'azina el dim'asi al techerash. As David HaMelech says, hear my prayers, Hashem. Incline your ear to my cries, but you will not be silent when I cry tears. Upirshu atos v'sham shemizeh shelo amar hapasuk shemael b'chi o ra'a o re'eyas dimasi ela amar el dimasi al techerash. The Tosfos explains how you see that from the pasuk. When it comes to his prayer, King David is asking Hashem to listen to his prayer. He doesn't ask Hashem to see his tears, but rather he says, I know that you will not be silent to my tears. Mashma she'ein ze bakasha ela mitzius shemi shemorei d'maot hakadosh baruch hu shomeya v'na'aneh l'tfilato. That what you infer from the language of that verse is that David is not giving a prayer when he says, do not be silent to my tears, but he's saying you won't be silent to my tears because my tears have an automatic effect that God cannot resist. Kevin sheshari dimalo ninalu, because the gates of heaven were never locked. V'Rashi b'maseches brachos piresh hadima kvar nir'et lifnei Hashem ve'in sarich lihitpalel rak shetitkaber lefanav. That Rashi points out that once God sees a person's tears, you don't even need to have any further supplication other than that God will accept anything that you say. Because of hami'iri shetfilah hayotzeit mima'amakei halev ad she'adima goveret alav hu mekubelet biyoter. The Meiri writes that prayer that comes from the inner recesses of the heart, it comes from deep inside, up until the point when tears take over. So that's the most acceptable form of prayer. The Hizbir HaMaharsha, Sha'afal Pi Shenemar Kol Hasharm Nimna Luchutz Mishari Ona'a, and the Maharsha explains that even though the Gemara says that all the gates are locked except for the gates of oppression, mashma shahashar hayachid shalonin al hushar haona, which sounds like that the only gate that is not locked is the gate of oppression, meaning when a person is hurt by someone else's actions or speech, then that's the only gate that's not locked. Zelo soter mashakatuv shari dimaloninalo. That's not a contradiction to what the Gemara says also, that the gate of tears is not locked. The mashmashi yeshar nosaf shaloninal shehu shar hadima. It sounds like there's two gates, the gates of ona'ah and the gates of tears. So ki hatamhu sheshari ona'ah aloninalu mishum shadam shemitanahu bali deidima v'shari dimaloninalu shnei mamorim elu echadei. Really, the Gemaras are not contradicting each other, but rather the gate of ona'ah is the same gate as the gate of tears. Because through ona'ah, it causes a person to cry. And that's the gate that's not locked. Va'od Amar Rabbi El-Azar, Al kol averot she'adam oseh HaKadosh Baruch Hu nifra mimenu al yedei shaliach. Rabbi El-Azar further said that for all sins, God will exact vengeance from a person via a proxy. The kavanat chazal b'zeh lomar she'honesh yoter kal ki lefamim hashaliach mitakev. Meaning that when a person is punished, sometimes the punishment will be lighter because when it's done via proxy, it doesn't have the same harshness and intensity. But when a person is the victim of when the person is the what's the word? The opposite of victim. He's the perpetrator. When a person is a perpetrator of ona'ah, then God will punish that person directly, not via proxy. Shenemar uviyado anach belishum ikov. That it is in God's hands to oppress or to punish the person who commits ona'ah. Vihine. So he's basically building a case essentially why ona'ah is such a serious sin. V'hinei legabi masha amru chazal shebeishto tzarach zehirut yetera shelo ligrom lahona'ata. So now let's get back to the issue of the wife. Our sages clearly say that you have to be extra careful with your wife not to cause her ona'ah. Kasov hachafetz chaim b'sifro chovat hashmira shehu hadin sheyesh lehizaher gam be'onat sha'ar nashim kegon ha'ozeret v'hamazkira. Chafetz Chaim writes that you have to also be careful with the oppression of any woman, such as the housekeeper or the secretary. Because the whole reasoning of the Gemara is that a female's tears are prevalent. Women are much more sensitive. And so even though if you said the same thing to a guy, he would just brush it off, sometimes when you say something brusque to a woman, she's going to start crying. And the Chafetz Chaim says, well, why then does the Gemara talk about being careful with your wife's tears? Why not just say with any woman's tears? So he answers, because the Gemara is speaking in what is more prevalent, that you're going to have the most interaction you're going to have with a woman is going to be with your wife, right? If you ever find yourself in life having more interaction with the women at work than you do with your wife, that's not a good thing. So that's not a good thing. Sometimes it happens, a person gets so engrossed in his work, he ends up spending more time with the women at work than he does with his wife. But that's not a healthy sign, right? But the Chafetz Chaim explains that's what the Gemara means. The Gemara is basically saying, be careful with your wife's tears because you're around her all the time, and therefore it's quite likely that you're going to say something even inadvertently that's going to end up causing her to cry. אבל המהר"ל בחידושי אגדות כתב שכוונת הגמרא הייתה שבאשתו צריך זהירות יתרה יותר משאר נשים, כיוון שאשתו כגופו ולכן עונת בעלה קשה לו יותר ודמעתה מצויה יותר. The Maharal offers a different explanation. He says that the reason why the Gemara says specifically your wife is because the two of you have such a close relationship that what you say is going to affect your wife more than what a stranger says. In other words, if a guy, an angry driver on the road, curses out your wife because he doesn't like her driving, okay, it'll startle her. It may make her, feel bad, but that's not enough to cause her to cry because the guy is probably just a jerk who's a stranger, maybe mentally ill or something like that. But when she knows that her husband is unhappy with her, so that's going to cause her to cry more. That's what the Maharal says. And that's why you have to be even more careful with your wife, because your words will have a much bigger impact on her than anyone else's. So the conclusion that Rav Sharaga makes is that the fact is you have to be careful in what you say to every human being, not just your wife, not just women, but to all human beings, of even those of the masculine variety. But there's a special command for your wife. And if for whatever reason you end up saying something that is hurtful to your wife, you have to make every effort to appease her right away. And do your best to make sure that the Shechina remains between you. So he does write in the footnote that the Iyun Yaakov, which is one of the commentaries on the Gemara, says the Kal v'chomer tzarich lizahar bo'nas isha acheres mehaitama shedimasa mitzuya. He says he understands that when the Gemara says you have to be careful with your wife's tears, or how you speak with your wife, is because it's a kal v'chomer. Once I know that I have to be careful with my wife, surely I have to be careful with another woman. He says, because when it comes to your wife, even without the law of Ona, you have to show honor to your wife. Because Chazal tell us that you have to actually show more respect for your wife than you do for yourself. So you have to let her go in first. You have to open the door for her. You have to, if there's only one piece of food left, you have to give it to your wife. You have to show more honor to your wife than you do to yourself. So therefore, it goes without saying that you have to be careful not to say anything that will harm her or that will hurt her. So if that's, but I guess the Iyun Yaakov feels that the fact that Chazal felt they had to say it regarding your wife, certainly it applies to other women as well.
Workplace, all women, and sometimes there's a situation things are developing, and
you lose it.
Yeah, things lose it, things happen, and you may have to go a little farther, in heated conversations or things that maybe you'll be more sensitive than your wife.
I agree. I don't feel that there's any justification, even in the workplace, to ever get heated. It happens. I'm not saying I've never gotten heated. I've gotten heated with my wife also, because we're all human. We all recognize that sometimes we say things. But what you're seeing from the halacha is that you have to, if you have the presence of mind to catch yourself and prevent yourself from being heated, you're obligated to do so. And there's always a way to get results even in the workplace without getting heated, right? Would anyone take issue with that? You can always accomplish what you need to without raising your voice or without saying anything that's hurtful.
Where it was that read about where from that is if I yell back or
just if I yell back or have a problem, it gets out of hand. Like really, so what I
When you say it got bad, what does that mean?
told it, pay you lots of money, someone you think can probably with emotional things to throw out. So from Ross case, in my case, I learned to have a very, very thick skin, and I never say anything back. And
What do you mean these women would say something nasty to you?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, women can, they call that being catty, right?
So I've learned in that situation, like it's really works and it's even in some cases they're crying, you know, they think not sometimes. I just learned to have very and don't take it personal, and I never say anything back and make me right off talking. But I would never, ever, ever say same with your wife also. In the moment, thick skin, don't take it personal, and don't say anything back, and don't never criticize. Never criticize. That helps a lot of show bias, and that's the wife, but also my associate also, which is a really Italian lady also, central, so thick skin, don't take it personal, and fight my tongue a lot, and it helps.
You go, a true testimony. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good with that, Ron? Okay.
I'm not saying it's easy, but my nature is like that. My father, blessed memory, is very special that way, so it's easy for me. For me, not everybody, it's easy for me. That's not my testimony.
Right. I find that there's something in Canadian culture that allows people to be to not lose their cool as much as Americans, right? You know.
Um, so
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And then in Israel, it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
In Israel, people let loose, but they feel that that's healthy because you can put it all out on the table. And I guess I don't know. So the question is, like, is that better? Yeah. So I think what Chazal are advocating is some middle ground between those two. In other words, the problem sometimes in a Canadian culture is that you're not able to really express how you feel, and that's suppressed, and then it ends up exploding on the hockey rink, or somewhere else, right? Or on the roads. I have seen road rage in Canada. Yeah, right. But um, I suppose what Chazal are saying is that there's nothing wrong with being completely truthful about how you feel, but without the intention of doing it to hurt somebody else. There are many times when a person becomes emotionally distraught and his objective is to say something, or her objective is to say something that will find a pressure point in the other person and will deliberately be hurtful because I feel you've wronged me. So what I'm going to try to do is say something that's going to harm you. And people, I've discovered this in multiple situations that sometimes people are not even conscious of that kind of activity. But it's helpful to really identify, like if you're in the heat of an argument and you can take note of the fact that I know why they're saying that. They're saying that because they know that that will get under my skin and that will bother me. They really are trying to just be be hurtful because they themselves are hurt. So let me not take it personally. Let me instead try to diffuse the situation and try to come back with, I see that I've hurt you. Let's not escalate the hurt. Let's try and work together on finding a resolution instead of pointing fingers or something like that. Okay. All right. So let us go on to, that was that was good therapy. Okay. Simon, it's an interesting question. Are you preventing the mother bird from crying? I'm not familiar with that. Um, I don't think that that has an effect. I don't know that a bird's tears are going to get through to the gate of tears. But it's an interesting question. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Um, I wonder whether or not a bird cries when you send it away. In other words, according to the Vilna Gaon, in one of his commentaries, he says that the act of sending away the mother bird is an act of cruelty because she knows why you're sending her away. Yeah. Yeah, I don't recall ever seeing that interpretation, no, because it could be that the gate of tears is only human tears. Okay, let's go on to the next shaila. Hizmin ochel shel badatz mesuyam veheviu lo badatz acher. Okay, so you ordered kosher food from a store, from a caterer under one hechsher, and they end up giving you food from a different hechsher. This is a very relevant question in Eretz Yisrael because you've got like hundreds of private hechsherim. The kashrus industry is um, somewhat disorganized in Eretz Yisrael, um, and it's very confusing actually if you're trying to maneuver on your own kashrus. It's really quite difficult, and so you have to almost ask for Hashem to give you siyata dishmaya. When you're in Yerushalayim, you're pretty much okay. You can rely on the fact that the food is covered as long as there's some kind of hechsher. But outside of Yerushalayim, it's sometimes like the Wild West, and you go to certain communities. Certain communities have kashrus really under control, under wraps, and other communities do not. So you have to really, especially when you're staying outside of Yerushalayim, you really have to inquire carefully about the hechsher of a hotel or of a restaurant that you're going to. So here's the following shaila. Hizmanti catering, that's a Hebrew word, by the way, catering, okay? V'hitneti itam she'ihia behechsher muhudar shel badatz beis Yosef. So I ordered a meal from a caterer, and I stipulated that I would like the catering to all be under a very high quality hechsher. I asked for Badatz Beis Yosef. So I guess the person is a Sfaradi, and they want Badatz Beit Yosef. And they ended up catering the meal with food that is from another hechsher that I normally don't use. באופן שמחירם של שתי ההכשירים הנ"ל שווה. And it's not that one is more expensive than another. Both hechshers charge the same amount for their supervision. האם אני חייב לשלם להם מחיר מלא מאחר שלא הביאו מה שהזמנתי? So am I entitled to come back to the caterer with a grievance and say to him, I'm not paying you the full price for the hechsher that you provided because you brought me a hechsher from a different kashrus organization that I didn't ask for and I normally don't rely upon. The food was good. It's the same food, right? No different, just a different hechsher that I normally did not rely upon. Now, I could imagine this being very touchy because on the one hand, the guy has a grievance that you didn't provide me the hechsher that I asked for. Well, the caterer says, did you eat the food? Sure, I ate the food, right? So the question is, so you're upset with me because I didn't provide you with the hechsher that you had ordered, but you not upset to the point you're not religiously offended to the point where you refuse to eat the food. So, so is there a substantive damage or not? Yeah, no, he just doesn't want to, he's going to pay for the food. He doesn't want to pay for the cost of, in other words, you pay for the food, but plus there's a hashgacha fee. Yeah. He doesn't want to pay the full hashgacha fee because I was prepared to pay a premium for the hashgacha fee if you would have done it under Badatz Beit Yosef. But you brought it under another hechsher that I normally don't think very highly of. And I wasn't prepared to pay that kind of premium fee for that hashgacha. So that's his side of the argument. Right. Each hashgacha is the same price. That's right.
But the difference from a hashgacha point of view wasn't a problem to him, it was like the food.
Yeah, but he ate the food reluctantly,
He had to pay for a hashgacha anyway.
That's right.
Somebody had to do it. So if there was no difference in price, then there's an issue with the contract because the caterer didn't.
The caterer was in breach of contract,
Right.
clearly.
Right.
But the question is, does that translate into a reduction in the fees? Because you gave me a mashgiach that from an agency that I don't normally utilize. And so my grievance against you is, you tack on, there's an additional fee if you want a higher level of hashgacha, right? So I was prepared to get a higher level of hashgacha if it would have been Badatz Beit Yosef. But I'm not prepared to pay a higher premium fee if it was hashgacha X, because that's not a hashgacha that I rely on. It's not a hashgacha that I feel is worth the same amount of money as the Beit Yosef hashgacha. So that's his side of the argument. Not only are you in breach of contract, but you provided me with a hashgacha that I don't feel is worth the price to pay that they are passing along. Okay, so you realize that
if you negotiate that before you eat it, if he doesn't want, okay, just send it back.
Yeah, I mean, the issue is that he ate the food.
Yes.
So when he agreed to pay a certain amount for the hashgacha, whether there's a price difference or not, what we're being told is there's no price difference.
he agreed to pay for a certain price for the hashgacha, but that's Beit Yosef.
But he still ate the food, so he agrees to the point of dietary, his dietary standards, that this hashgacha is of a suitable standard.
Correct. But Doug, I think we would all agree that kashrus, as like many things in our religious lives, is not black and white. It's not either on or off. It's not either kosher or treif. It's like, if I had all my druthers, I'd rather have Chalav Yisrael and Yashan and Rabbi so-and-so as the mashgiach. But, I'll bend I'm not going to, my standards are not absolute. That would be my preference. But if they put in front of me another, standard, I'll eat it, but it's not my preference.
After the event, or before
Okay. All right.
because that was after the event, and I say, yes, you have something to stand by. It was before the event, in other words, the caterer said, I can't get Beis Yosef, but I've got this. Or he put a sign up that said it was this instead of Beis Yosef, and they still sat down and ate food without saying anything, then I'd say no. There is an issue with the contract. Sure, but whether he should get a discount because of he didn't get what he wanted, it's a matter of customer service.
But he was not why he's finding out like he can't cancel anything. He's got an event coming up, so
At the end of the day, I can tell you that if you're not happy with the dietary standard of the food that's been served to you, you go and complain to the caterer. prior to, even if it's.
Yeah, but
even
at,
if it's
but,
at
at-
the
but,
meal.
yeah, but Doug, at that point, there's nothing that can be done.
I understand,
Yeah.
but you can voice your opinion, still carry on and say, we'll talk about it afterwards, because I'm not talking about it now, I've got other things that are more important. And then you have an argument. But to come up afterwards and say, oh, well, you know, I saw that you did this and you didn't do anything about it, but now I want to negotiate a deal. That's like, you're now potentially breach of contract because you agreed to pay a certain amount for that meal and service, which you're now going to.
So Doug's argument is that you saw who the new mashgiach was. You saw that it wasn't what that Badatz Beit Yosef. You were silent. You didn't say anything. That's in itself a sign of acquiescence, and therefore you can't come after the fact. Okay, all right. Azoy Zakt, Rabbi Ross. Okay. Okay. Let's look at the tshuva tomorrow. We'll continue. All right.
Thank you.
Take care.